If I had known what this job would cost me, I never would have said yes. But back then, I wasn't thinking clearly. The bills were piling up, and the job description sounded too easy to pass up. Night security for an empty school. Easy money, they said. Just a few hours of peace and quiet. They didn't mention the whispers. Think you know how this story ends? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. The school stood at the edge of town, surrounded by empty fields and a line of skeletal trees that seemed to claw at the sky. When I arrived, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of red and orange bleeding across the clouds. My car crunched over the gravel as I parked in the nearly empty lot. Only one other car was there. An old, dented sedan that looked like it hadn't moved in years. The air was cold and still as I approached the building. The heavy steel door creaked as I pushed it open, and the scent of bleach and stale air hit me. The dim hallway stretched out ahead, lined with lockers that gleamed faintly under the flickering fluorescent lights. Each step echoed, loud and hollow, like the building itself was alive and listening. The janitor was waiting for me at the front desk, a hunched man with graying hair and tired eyes. He handed me the keys without a word, but as I turned to leave, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was bony but firm. "Follow the rules," he said in a low voice, his eyes darting down the hallway like he was afraid of being overheard. "Whatever happens, don't ignore them." "What rules?" I asked, confused. He let go of my wrist and shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. Then, without another word, he disappeared through a side door, leaving me alone in the empty school. I unfolded the paper, and my stomach tightened as I read the list. Stay inside. No matter what you hear, do not step outside after midnight. If you see the lights in room 104 flicker, lock the door and stay out of sight. Do not look directly at the mirrors after 1 a.m. Cover them if you must. If you hear your name whispered, do not respond. The third floor bell rings at 3 a.m. Ignore it. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of elaborate prank. But the handwriting was shaky, almost desperate. And there was something about the janitor's expression that made my skin crawl. Still, I told myself it was just a list of superstitions or an old joke among staff. I stuffed the paper into my pocket and started my rounds. The school felt wrong even for an empty building. The walls seemed to hum faintly, like a far-off engine was running somewhere deep below. My footsteps sounded too loud, bouncing off the polished floors and empty classrooms. Every so often, I thought I heard something, soft shuffling, like shoes on tile, but when I turned, there was nothing. In the first hour, nothing happened. I wandered the halls, checking doors and windows like I'd been told. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you start noticing your own breathing, the rustle of your clothes, the way your heart seems to thud just a little too loudly in your chest. By the second hour, I started hearing noises. A faint tapping sound, coming from somewhere down the hall. I froze, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. It was probably just a loose pipe or the building settling. At least that's what I told myself. Then the lights flickered. Not all of them, just the ones near room 104. I stopped, staring down the hallway where the faint glow spilled out from the cracked door. My throat tightened as I remembered the rule. If you see the lights in room 104 flicker, lock the door and stay out of sight. For a long moment, I just stood there, torn between curiosity and fear. Then, the door creaked open, just an inch, as if inviting me to come closer. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. Whatever was in that room, I didn't want to find out. I hurried to the nearest door, fumbling with the keys as the hallway behind me grew colder, the air feeling thick and heavy, like it was pressing against my skin. Finally, I locked myself inside the janitor's closet, pressing my back against the wall and holding my breath. The tapping sound was louder now, more deliberate, like someone or something was walking up and down the hall. That's when I heard it. My name, whispered. Soft, raspy, and impossibly close. Don't respond, I thought, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. But the voice came again, more insistent this time, drawing out the syllables like it was tasting them. And I knew right then this wasn't just a job. It was a warning. I sat there in the janitor's closet, clutching the flashlight like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. My breathing was shallow, the kind of panicked breathing you only notice when you're trying to be quiet. Outside the door, the tapping sound stopped. The air grew still again, but not in a way that felt safe. More like the kind of silence that makes you wonder if something is waiting. The rules ran through my head, each one replaying like a broken record. Don't step outside after midnight. Ignore the third-floor bell. Don't look at the mirrors. They sounded ridiculous when I read them, like something out of a bad ghost story. But now they felt like they might be the only thing keeping me alive. I pulled the crumpled paper from my pocket, my hands shaking as I unfolded it again. The dim light from the flashlight caught the jagged handwriting, every letter looking frantic, like the person writing it had been in a rush or terrified. As I read over the rules again, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Why these rules? Why this school? And more importantly, why had no one warned me before I took the job? The tapping sound returned, faint and steady, but this time it was joined by something else. A low hum, like the vibration of an old machine, barely audible but constant. My stomach sank as I realized it wasn't coming from the hall. It was coming from above me. I glanced up, aiming the flashlight at the ceiling. For a moment, there was nothing, just the exposed pipes and cobwebs you'd expect in a janitor's closet. But then, faintly, I saw it. A shadow. It moved quickly, too fast for me to make out details, but it was there. Something was up there. I dropped the flashlight, scrambling back against the wall. The light spun wildly, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. That's when I noticed the mirror. It was small, hanging on the back of the closet door. The kind of thing someone might use to check their reflection during a quick break. Harmless, right? Except I remembered the rule. Don't look directly at the mirrors after 1 a.m., cover them if you must. I stared at it, frozen, as the flashlight settled on the glass. At first, all I could see was my reflection, pale, wide-eyed, and trembling. But then the shadow appeared again, not above me, but in the mirror. It wasn't human. Its shape was wrong, shifting and stretching like smoke caught in a windless room. Its head tilted, as if it were watching me, and though it had no eyes, I could feel its gaze. I fumbled with my jacket, pulling it off and throwing it over the mirror, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The tapping stopped. The hum faded. The silence returned, but it wasn't a relief. It felt heavier now, like the air itself had weight. I grabbed the flashlight and pushed open the closet door, my legs shaky as I stepped back into the hallway. The list of rules was crumpled in my hand, damp with sweat. I needed to understand what was happening. I made my way to the security office at the front of the school, hoping I'd find some kind of explanation. The door was slightly ajar, and when I pushed it open, the room felt just as cold and lifeless as the rest of the building. There was a desk with an old computer, a stack of papers, and a monitor showing grainy footage from the security cameras. I glanced at the screen, the static crackling faintly as the cameras flipped through the empty hallways. But then, one of the screens showed something that wasn't empty. It was room 104. The door was wide open now, though I was sure I'd seen it shut just moments ago. Inside, the shadows seemed darker, almost solid, and something moved in the corner of the frame. slow, deliberate, and completely wrong. I turned away from the monitor, my stomach twisting. On the desk, I noticed another piece of paper, this one folded neatly. My name was written on the front. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded it, revealing a single line written in the same frantic handwriting as the list of rules. They don't like it when you break the rules. I swallowed hard, the words echoing in my head. It wasn't just superstition. These weren't empty warnings. Something was here, something that followed these rules, and it expected me to do the same. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, the third-floor bell rang. It wasn't loud, more like a distant chime, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 3 a.m. exactly. My hands tightened around the note, my pulse racing. Ignore it. That's what the rule said. Ignore the bell. But as the sound echoed through the empty halls, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if I didn't? The bell's chime echoed through the school, soft but chilling. It wasn't the sound itself that unnerved me. It was what it meant. The rules had been clear. Ignore the third-floor bell at 3 a.m. But standing there, with the clock on the wall confirming the time, I couldn't shake the instinct to look toward the stairwell leading up. The hallway stretched out in silence, but it wasn't comforting. The shadows seemed darker now, almost alive. The air felt colder, and my breath hung faintly in front of me. My flashlight's beam wavered as I aimed it at the stairs. Ignore it, I reminded myself, clenching the crumpled rules in my pocket. I couldn't let curiosity get the better of me, and yet curiosity was winning. Another chime sounded, this one faintly off-key, like a cracked bell. It sent a jolt through my chest. I turned toward the stairwell, my pulse quickening. The stairs were bathed in dim light, each step disappearing into the shadows above. I hesitated, then forced myself to take a step back. The rules weren't suggestions, they were warnings. Whatever was on the third floor, I wasn't going to find out. I turned away and hurried back toward the security office. I thought putting some distance between myself and the bell would help. Didn't. The hallways felt longer, like they stretched on forever. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, each sound bouncing back at me as if the building itself was mocking me. As I passed a row of lockers, one of the doors creaked open slowly, the sound slicing through the silence like a scream. I froze, my flashlight trained on the open locker. It was empty. Of course, it was empty. Just the air pressure. I muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself. But the locker door slammed shut again, hard enough to rattle the others around it. I nearly dropped the flashlight. Stay calm, I whispered. You're just imagining things. But I wasn't. By the time I reached the security office, my hands were trembling. I closed the door behind me and locked it, leaning against the wall as I tried to catch my breath. The monitors flickered, cycling through the empty hallways and classrooms. Except they weren't empty. Room 104's camera showed the door wide open again. But this time, the lights inside were dim and flickering. I squinted at the screen, leaning closer. A shadow moved across the room. Not quick like before, but slow, deliberate, like it wanted me to notice. My stomach twisted as the shadow stopped in the center of the room. It just stood there, shapeless yet menacing, before it suddenly turned toward the camera. My breath caught in my throat, and then, just as quickly as it appeared, the camera feed cut to static. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the chair. My eyes darted to the list of rules still in my pocket. If the lights in room 104 flicker, lock the door and stay out of sight. I had followed the rule. But what if it wasn't enough? A sudden knock on the security office door made me jump. It wasn't loud, just a soft, rhythmic tapping. My heart raced as I gripped the flashlight, inching closer to the door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The tapping stopped. I stared at the door, waiting, my mind racing. Couldn't be the janitor, he'd left hours ago. No one else was supposed to be here. The tapping resumed, louder this time. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but something in me screamed not to open it. Follow the rules, I muttered, stepping back. Always follow the rules. And then, from behind me, I heard it. My name. It was barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable. The same voice I'd heard before, raspy and impossibly close. Don't respond, I thought, my grip on the flashlight tightening. But the voice came again, and this time it was louder. Open the door, it hissed. I spun around, my back against the door, scanning the room with the flashlight. There was no one there. The monitors flickered again, and for a brief moment, every screen showed the same thing. The shadow from room 104. It was standing in the middle of the hallway, motionless, as if it were waiting for me. Then the screens went black. I forced myself to move, stumbling toward the desk to grab the spare keys. My mind was screaming at me to leave, to get out of the school and never come back. But another part of me knew it wasn't that simple. The rules weren't just about surviving the night, they were about staying here. Leaving wasn't an option. Not yet. I took a deep breath. The list of rules crumpled in one hand and the flashlight in the other. Whatever was in this school wasn't going to let me off easy. And the night was far from over. I gripped the spare keys tightly as I forced myself to step out of the security office. My nerves were screaming for me to stay locked inside, but I couldn't ignore the creeping dread that whatever was out there wouldn't stop at just tapping on doors. The hallway outside felt colder than before, like the air had been sucked out, leaving only a biting chill that clawed at my skin. I turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, and started walking, slowly, carefully, each step deliberate. The third-floor bell chimed again. It sounded weaker this time, like the strike of a hammer on a cracked piece of metal. My stomach tightened. I glanced toward the stairwell again, catching movement out of the corner of my eye. There was something or someone at the top of the stairs. It didn't move, not at first, but its outline was unmistakable. A figure, tall and thin, barely illuminated by the faint glow from the emergency lights. My breath hitched as it tilted its head, almost curiously, like it was studying me. I froze, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. Just don't go up, I whispered to myself. Ignore the bell. Ignore the stairs. The figure stepped forward. I turned on my heel and walked faster, my boots echoing down the empty hallway. My flashlight caught the familiar markers of the classrooms I'd passed before, their doors shut tight. I told myself that if I could just keep moving, I'd be okay. Then one of the doors creaked open. It was room 104. The light inside flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the hallway floor. I stopped dead in my tracks, the list of rules flashing in my mind. Lock the door and stay out of sight. But the door was already open. My heart pounded as I approached slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door swayed on its hinges, moving back and forth as though caught in a breeze, though the air was still. I reached out, hesitating, before pushing it open the rest of the way. The room was empty, at least it looked that way at first. Desks were arranged neatly, the chalkboard at the front covered in faint, smudged writing. But the flickering light above revealed something in the corner, just outside the edge of the beam. A shape. I stepped back, my throat tightening as I tried to focus on it. Whatever it was, it wasn't moving. Then slowly it turned. It wasn't a shadow this time, it had form. Its face was featureless, its limbs long and unnaturally thin. It tilted its head, just like the figure at the stairs, and stepped closer. The light above me buzzed and flickered faster, making the room flash like a strobe. I backed into the hallway, gripping the door frame for support. My legs felt weak, my chest tight. "Stay out of sight," I whispered, slamming the door shut and fumbling with the keys. My hands shook so badly that it took 3 tries to lock it. Once the lock clicked into place, the hallway fell silent. I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in short gasps. The school felt more alive now, every sound amplified, every shadow deeper. I thought about the other rules, running through them again in my head. Stay inside after midnight. Easy enough. Cover the mirrors after 1 a.m. done. Ignore the bell. I hadn't gone upstairs, so that counted, right? But the rule about room 104, it felt different now. Like it wasn't just about following instructions. It was about survival. The faint hum returned, low and rhythmic, like it was coming from the walls themselves. Pulsed, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. I started walking again, forcing myself to keep moving. At the end of the hallway, a mirror hung on the wall. It was one of the few I hadn't covered earlier, and now it seemed to shimmer faintly, as if reflecting something that wasn't there. I stopped, my hand tightening around the flashlight. Don't look directly at the mirrors after 1 a.m. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 3:12 a.m. Just cover it, I muttered, pulling off my jacket and stepping closer. But as I lifted the jacket, I caught a glimpse of the reflection and froze. It wasn't me staring back. The figure from the stairs was in the mirror, standing just behind me, its head tilted at an impossible angle. My blood ran cold as it raised a long skeletal hand and pointed. I whipped around, the flashlight swinging wildly, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't bound by the rules of the physical world. The tapping started again, this time from multiple directions. It echoed off the walls, getting louder, closer. My pulse raced as I broke into a run, the flashlight bouncing in my hand. The hum grew louder, almost deafening now, and with it came a new sound, soft, wet footsteps, like someone walking barefoot through water. I didn't stop to look. I just kept running, my mind screaming at me to find safety, though I wasn't sure there was such a thing anymore. And then I heard it again. My name. The sound of my name, whispered from somewhere behind me, sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just sound, it was the weight of it, the way it wrapped around me, making the air feel heavier. My legs locked in place, my body frozen with fear. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. The rules had been clear. Do not respond. But the voice didn't stop. It called my name again, drawn out and teasing, as if it knew how much I wanted to look. I stumbled forward, forcing myself to move. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep the flashlight steady, and the beam of light wavered across the hallway. I didn't know where to go anymore. The security office felt like a trap. The classrooms? Worse. Another whisper came, louder this time. Closer. I spun around, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, but the hallway was empty. Nothing but shadows stretched toward the corners, shifting faintly like they were alive. That's when the footsteps started. They were slow and deliberate, echoing from the hallway behind me. The sound was almost mocking, each step measured like it knew I was too scared to move. I started walking faster, my breath coming in short gasps. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the faint hum that had been constant since earlier. The footsteps followed. I turned a corner, nearly tripping over my own feet, and stopped in my tracks. The mirrors. There were 3 of them lining the hallway, each one large enough to reflect the emptiness of the corridor. I cursed under my breath, remembering the rule. Do not look directly at the mirrors after 1 a.m. But the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a suffocating fog. My name repeated over and over, overlapping and echoing, until it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. I shut my eyes, feeling blindly for the first mirror. My fingers brushed against its cold surface as I draped my jacket over it. One down. I reached for the second, my hand shaking as the footsteps grew louder behind me. The air felt colder, pressing against my back like a weight. I threw my jacket over the second mirror, the sound of fabric sliding against glass far too loud in the silence. But as I reached for the third, the whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. I opened my eyes, staring straight into the uncovered mirror. At first, it was just my reflection, wide-eyed, pale and trembling. But then, something else moved in the glass. Behind me, it was the figure from room 104, standing impossibly close. Its head tilted at that same unsettling angle, its featureless face impossibly still. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. My mind was racing, every instinct screaming that I needed to get out of the hallway. I left the last mirror uncovered, my fear of staying outweighing the risk of breaking the rule. The footsteps started again, faster this time. I bolted, running blindly down the hallway. The flashlight bounced in my grip, casting erratic beams of light across the walls and floor. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away. But then, a familiar sound stopped me dead in my tracks. The bell. It wasn't coming from the third floor this time. It was closer, louder, like it was right above me. I turned slowly, and there it was. The figure. It wasn't in the mirror now. It was real, standing at the end of the hallway, its body stretched and distorted, as if the shadows themselves were bending to its will. The flashlight flickered, the beam dimming as the figure started moving toward me. Not walking, gliding, its feet never touching the ground. I backed away, but my path was blocked. A door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the narrow hallway. The flashlight went out. I was plunged into darkness, the air thick with the sound of my own breathing. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like the only sound in the world. And then I felt it. A hand, cold, skeletal and impossibly strong, grabbed my shoulder. I screamed, twisting and swinging the flashlight wildly. Connected with something solid, and the hand released me. The flashlight flickered back to life just long enough to show me the figure recoiling, its body twisting unnaturally as if in pain. This was my chance. I ran, slamming into walls and doors as I stumbled through the school. My legs burned, and my lungs felt like they were about to burst, but I didn't stop. The whispers returned, louder and angrier now. They came from all directions, overlapping and filling the hallways with a deafening roar. I turned a corner and saw it. A window at the end of the hallway. My way out. I sprinted toward it, the rules be damned. Stay inside after midnight? I didn't care anymore. I needed to escape. The glass shattered as I hurled myself through it, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I landed hard on the gravel outside, my knees and palms scraping against the rough surface. For a moment, everything was still, quiet, and then, from inside the school, I heard the bell again. I sat in my car, trembling, staring at the shattered window of the school. The cold air stung my scraped hands and knees, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were still trapped inside that building, replaying the sounds, the whispers, and the figure that shouldn't have been real. The gravel crunched under my feet as I staggered toward the driver's seat, my breath clouding in the frigid air. Every instinct told me to drive, just drive and never look back. But my keys were still in the security office. I hesitated, glancing back at the broken window. The school loomed against the night, its darkened hallways stretching endlessly in my mind. I couldn't go back in there, not after what I'd seen. But how far could I get without the keys? And more importantly, would it follow me? I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. The list of rules was still crumpled in my pocket, the paper damp with sweat. I pulled it out, smoothing it against my leg as my flashlight flickered faintly in my hand. The rules hadn't just been warnings, they'd been my lifeline. But even with them, I'd broken one. Stay inside after midnight. I looked at the school again, the jagged edges of the broken window reflecting the faint moonlight. The air around it felt heavy, charged, like the building itself was alive and watching me. I told myself I wouldn't go back in. Couldn't. But then, a shadow moved in the broken window. It was there, the figure, watching me. My legs moved before my brain could process what I was doing. I stumbled into the car, slamming the door shut and locking it. The keys might be inside the school, but I wasn't about to set foot in there again. Not now. I reached for my phone to call for help, but my fingers stopped mid-dial. The screen flickered, showing nothing but static before the battery drained completely. The hum I'd heard inside the school was back, faint but growing louder, vibrating through the air. And then I saw it. The figure stepped through the broken window, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't glide this time, it walked, each step purposeful. Its featureless face turned toward me, and though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze pierce through the glass of the car. I froze, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, as the figure stopped just a few feet from the car. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. I didn't move for what felt like hours. My body ached, my heart pounded, but I couldn't bring myself to unlock the door or even lower the window. The school was silent again, as if none of it had ever happened. But I knew better. The sun was just starting to rise when I finally stepped out of the car, the pale light chasing away the lingering shadows. I didn't dare look back as I started walking down the empty road, leaving the school and my car behind. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. It's been weeks now, but the feeling hasn't left me. I see it sometimes, in the corner of my vision. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A whisper in an empty room. I can't sleep without the lights on. Even then, the darkness feels closer than it should. I took the job because I needed the money. I thought it would be easy, just a few hours in an empty building. Now, I'd give anything to forget it ever happened. Ready for more chills and mysteries? Subscribe and turn on the bell. You never know what story is coming next.